right, Joe, you ready for the internet weather this week?
Definitely.
All right, well, nothing super amazing, but there are a couple of new things here. This is the most probed ports chart, which is the ports that are probed the most, but not necessarily by the most number of unique sources. Something's not unexpected. Telnet, SSH, in the top positions here. We've seen them pretty much every week for the past several years now. 8545 is that Ethereum wallet that has a vulnerability. There's still a few actors out there trying to look for that. NTP could just be people looking for open NTP reflectors for use in reflective denial of service attacks. Microsoft SQL Server, the 445 TCP is probably related to WannaCry and those vulnerabilities around that were being leveraged. Remote Desktop Protocol. The one I'm going to call out, we're going to take a closer look at, is 6379 TCP, which we don't see that often. It did rise 3 positions, so it was down here somewhere, maybe position 11 or something last week, so it was kind of hidden from view. Port 2000, we're also going to take a look at another chart because it's actually more interesting in the most sources probing, and then you've got web. Okay. So in the terms of the most sources probing, we have a couple of repeat characters, but usually this is related to botnet-related activity. So 2000 TCP is related to the Mikrotik vulnerabilities that we've been talking about for maybe a month or two now. And then the 5555 TCP is related to the Android debugger service. Those are the ones that stand out to me. So port 6379 is related to Redis, and this is probing for the Redis server. What's interesting here is you can kind of see there's definitely an upward ramp trend of a density of scanning. So there's more of it going on than had been in the past, and at higher levels than were achieved before. If you use Redis, you might want to make sure that anything that you have that might be internet facing is secured, protected from being compromised. Port 2000 TCP, we've seen, and that's actually represented in blue here, which is the more recent activity. And then prior to that, we have some red activity. The reason I include that is this is that 8291 TCP, which is also a Mikrotik port. Yeah. There are a lot of Mikrotik devices out there on the internet, though. And because they are kind of edge network devices, a lot of times they are internet fronting. So they expose themselves to the internet more often than not. So
does this overlap, or does this seem like it changed from one port to the other?
It does not overlap. Okay. It's changing from one port to the other. There's a small amount of overlap here where you can see, and then they kind of went away for the most part. The red kind of disappears from using the 8291 to switching over to using port 2000 almost exclusively.
So I know we've seen this in the past. Does this seem like a configuration was changed by a command and control, that kind of thing? Or
probably, in terms of how they want to look for it. So I think what's actually going on here is they're using these 2 ports because they're pretty much kind of exclusively used by Mikrotik, and they're trying to use that as a means to find Mikrotik devices for later exploitation. So there is a remote exploit vulnerability. This was announced back on March 16th, which if we go back here, that would have been right about here. Yeah. So about 2 weeks later, something like that, 8 days later it looks like, that's when we started to see an uptick in the scanning activity for these types of devices. So if you have Mikrotik router, you would want to make sure you patch it. And that's one of the problems with these types of devices in general, is people often forget that they need to be patched.
Right.
So important thing to pay attention to. The next one, which we have talked about as well quite a bit over the past couple of months, is a exploitation that is occurring over the Android debugger port on port 5555 TCP. This is actually a 120-day chart, so it's about 4 months. And you can see back here on maybe like February 3rd, February 2nd of this year, we went from basically nothing to a very smooth, perfect upsweep to around 7,000, almost 7,000 scan sources per hour. Not a ton, but still a decent amount. And what's actually happening here is not so much a vulnerability as it is that people have accidentally probably left the debugger port open on their Android device. The purpose of it is to allow developers to get into the device and debug running code. But if you leave it open to the world, they can get in there. debug some code or execute other code that's not meant to be running on there. And that's how they're compromising them. It's not just phones that are involved here. You know, we know Android is used on a lot of phones and handsets, but there's tons of other deployments of Android set-top boxes, even inside television sets. Like I believe my Samsung TV has Android as its underlying operating system. You know, we only see 5,000 or 7,000, where we know the deployed embedded base of Android is far more in the many, many hundreds of millions of Android devices out there. So it's a very small percentage of those that are exposing this port. And that's actually all we have for this week.